All right, so everybody here and those of you watching from home later on, welcome to Dendron's July 2022 Greenhouse Talk. And we've got a real treat for you today. I'm really excited about it. You can't see me, but I hope you can hear that I'm excited. So today presenting is Derek Ardolf on modularizing public documentation for Dendron Consumption. So Derek is a site reliability engineer at VMware. He's worked in a variety of different roles in tech, in systems engineering, technical writing, and he's been a dendrologist here and Dendron evangelist. So this is someone who's thought thoroughly about how do you codify knowledge and document it and make use of it and distribute it. And what he's prepared for today is actually a demo of some Microsoft virtualization documentation that he has converted into a self-contained Dendron vault. And he's going to talk about what he's learned doing that, how he did it, what he thinks is next. So if you're ready, you can take it away, Derek.
Sweet. Thank you for the introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen actually then. So I'm going to start with, you can you see the Docs Garden text here? I want to make sure that's all good.
Yep, I can see it.
Awesome. I'll put that link in the chat. So this is just like a GitLab org that I'm using right now as a place to store Dendron vaults that people would be able to pull in, much like how the seed bank talks about its use case. In fact, I'd like to, over time in the future, talk to Kevin more too about the future of the seed bank and how remote vaults can be used in that way. But we'll be able to talk about it today, where I'll be demoing a vault and how I'm just going to walk through. If someone was initializing their own workspace and pulling it down, it's going to be usual workflow that people have seen if they've just pulled down remote vaults, but for people who maybe aren't so used to it, it'll be a newer thing. So I'm going to just jump into this down here, and text is probably a little bit small. I right now have just an empty space here that I'm going to open up, and because I want to initialize a new workspace. And so with Dendron, let's go into Initialize Workspace. I'm going to go into my presentation here, open it up. Cool, made the files that I wanted, and let me go right back into that. So, here I'm at the root of a brand new workspace, which really is a self-contained vault setup. And self-contained vaults, for people who maybe haven't made any new ones in a while, they allow it so that there's an interesting way in which you import remote vaults into a dependency tree, kind of like you're working with software. You're treating containers of knowledge really as plugins to your own knowledge bases, which is really cool. And that's really what I loved about this idea. What got me really interested in Dendron in the first place is that I wanted to be able to expand and create public vaults that anyone could pull into their own knowledge bases, but also to convert existing knowledge bases that aren't in a Dendron native format, and what automation could be put in place to keep them in sync with what's upstream. So in this case, I'm just going to import a vault where I have it sitting inside of Docs Garden here. And this is DG Microsoft Virtualization. What this is doing is taking a GitHub repository on the Microsoft Virtualization documentation, which is in Markdown, but it's set up in a way with a few Markdown quirks that are specific to Microsoft and for publishing to their website, because the base content is published here. And I wanted to take that and make it easily available inside of Dendron. So this is kind of a first iteration proof of concept. I have the README file here. I use the new Dendron visualize CLI command to kind of go, hey, let's have an image that whenever it gets built, it auto generates that visualization, embeds it right in the README. It also embeds it in one of the notes inside of the vault. And I have plenty of links to the official Microsoft docs that these are pulling from, and also using GitLab pages so that GitLab's pipeline will automatically publish a version of the vault to the internet to make it easily accessible in that way too. And to view this, here is also into the Discord chat. By the way, all these links I'm going to be sharing inside of a Greenhouse notes at the very end that will be published to the Dendron wiki page, where we'll also have the YouTube recording. So cool, walk through a bunch of that stuff, but I want to make sure, let's pull this stuff in. In this case, I'm just going to use an HTTPS call to this Git repo. Let's go to my empty workspace, which to show that it is empty, I could just go and look at my tree view, which really there's just a root file because it's just the hello world really. All right, so if I did a vault, let's do a vault add. Place that in there. I'm just doing HTTPS because that means you don't need a GitLab account. If you SSH, what have you, it depends on what you're used to. Add that in. Gonna reload my workspace. It's gonna take a bit because, by the way, there's something like, I don't know, 750 or 800 notes from that virtualization documentation. All right, cool. So now you see the tree view is expanded. Using MSFT for the base of Microsoft because I'm thinking if there are going to be multiple Microsoft doc sets, it would be good if they each started with that as a root. And then I'm able to get straight into, let's toggle the preview, be able to then show the kind of how this vault will work. I took all of the markdown internal references, turned them all into backlinks. Most of the images I have throughout the documentation in this first iteration are really just references. They're embedded calls to the remote images as opposed to saving all of those images into this repository. Make it a little smaller. I'd like to give the option of, of making it capable of doing more. And what's cool is, I think we could do a full screen of the graph, right? Yeah. So, interesting to see what this looks like. Oh, baby. So, there's a lot going on here. And yeah, that's just a look at how it would be really cool to be able to pull in. Let's say you had a knowledge base internally. I work in tech, so internally I might have a support team, and it would be awesome to simply have knowledge bases associated with a variety of the tools that we support. Because what that gives you the capability of doing is if I drop into my notes vault, I want to create a brand new one that's, I don't know, SOPs and create new VM or something. Probably want to make sure that my Dendron config has, what is it called? Xvault wiki links. If you're using multi-vault setup, you want to be able to point to specific vaults that you're referencing. In my case, I have the Microsoft Virtualization Vault. So let me go back here to creating a new VM. Why don't I just go find, because everything now is in lookup in this other vault. I might say Hyper-V, I don't know, V8. I bet there's an introduction somewhere. Why don't I just jump into here? Let me get rid of that note graph for now. And say I want to take in this getting started section just as a reference point, and I could copy that to the clipboard. Down here, it's including that full path. When I go back to my SOP, creating a new VM, enter that here. I have a link that goes back, but if I really wanted to, I could have it be an embedding. And what's cool now is I'm able to remix around existing documentation. That's going to continuously get updated. Of course, what that means, though, is I have to make sure, will some of these break in case, Microsoft upstream changes the header and some other stuff. But this is a really cool way of looking at how you can pull in knowledge bases that have been dendronified, or however you'd like to call it, and work with them. And this is maintained by a large community, Microsoft community, tech writers, and I'm just really using some Python code that's doing all the conversions to it. But it's kind of a basic look at how people can make use of it, and I'd like to go into what I've learned about it and also what standards I've wanted to apply when bringing in this kind of documentation. Thing I'd like to jump into is that when you do add a new vault, it's going to say, let's see, MSFP. It adds it in as a self-contained vault. True, because this is how I built it, as a self-contained vault. But, I also want to jump in here and put that this is, let's see, we want to do sync, no push. In this case, because if you're using something like Workspace Sync, then you'd be able to make sure that this is treated as a read-only vault. You don't have permissions to write to it. This is a situation that usually if you're using something like the seed vaults, they're configured in a similar fashion where they're meant to be pulled from. And so that's kind of a cool little thing to put in case you have multiple vaults that someone doesn't have permissions to, so when you do workspace sync, you're not getting the error popping up on your screen. And but I want to go into, let's use this virtualization page as an example. And I hope this text looks okay on the screen. But at the top, I'm making sure to put a notice that says, by the way, this is not the original documentation. Here's the original source file, because if you find errors, let's say, in the content itself, and you want to contribute to the repository, to the documentation, you're going to want to go to the actual source, because this is taking all that source content downstream. So I've linked to the source file. So let me click on that. And this goes to the actual source file in that GitHub repo that it pulled from. This is where you would make your modification if you're actually wanting to update the content of that kind of page. I have who open sourced it. I have what license that was open sourced under, so I want to make sure to be adhering to that license and for people to be aware of how they can use the content too. And I also have a notice that says, by the way, all of these pages are using the canonical URL attribute that points to the actual published page. Here's the actual published page that you can then see that Microsoft publishes. And this is what's important about that is that it means that my published page here will not have any conflicts with SEO, because search engines are caring about what is the source of truth of this content, and when it sees duplicated content, it can lower that kind of stuff inside of a search engine results, because it goes, this is appearing in multiple places at once. So this is kind of just like a good internet steward and making sure that it's not conflicting when it gets published, because we use canonical URLs in Dendron's front matter, where I'm going to go into the front matter too. Where, let's see, here, so that when this site gets published, it adds that to the metadata of the HTML page. The cool thing is I just wanted to make sure, can this entire vault, every single file, have backlinks in a way to the actual source file that was converted to this, the Microsoft's purposeful published page, location, all of that jazz. In addition to, because this is a markdown source, wanted to maintain all of the source attributes that were in the original markdown file that Microsoft has. I don't really care for them in my case, but why not have them in there just so that they're maintained? And for future site, I don't want markdown files to completely overwrite themselves. I only want them to update and update the updated attribute here. If it finds that the source file needs to be updated, in order to do that, I'm actually saving the source file hash as an attribute. So that when my tooling runs through again, it looks through and goes, have any of these source files actually updated based on comparing those hash values? And from there it can go, okay, I see 5 files have been updated. I'm going to go through and update that. I haven't gotten to that part yet in my automation, but it's prepped and ready since it has the source file hash in place. But this is sort of a setup in which I kind of wanted to have learned a lot from the import pods that are used, where it's like you can map to title and description. Do you want to map to any other values? And one thing I want to learn is, see, I'm looking at an index file. Something that's cool about the current Markdown imports is you could choose that if it's an index file, that it should actually be that parent hierarchy's content instead of a subfile's content. That's one of the things I want to make use of. But so this is just a tour of a proof of concept, because I really want to have Docs Garden a place where I'm uploading more content. Like, I also am working on an ebook example, because MIT Press has at least one of their books is released under a Creative Commons license, which is all about open access and the commons. And it seemed like that would be an excellent one to have turned into a vault, because I think we could have anything from technical docs to ebooks. Ebooks are a lot easier because they're not rampantly being updated. So it's more about, how do I want to design the way that this book is created and used inside of Dendron, without having to go, how do I get all that automation in place to make sure it's continuously synced? So, and I went with GitLab because as an open source org on GitLab, I'm going to reach out to them to see if I can get higher plans that give me a lot more minutes in my automation pipelines, since I'm going to want to maybe get more and more vaults over time. And I kind of have my own roadmap of docs that I want to do from a technologist perspective around Kubernetes and or even the Dendron stack. You have VS Code documentation, you got Git documentation. There's like as part of the Git documentation, there's a open source, a Creative Commons licensed ebook all about pro Git. And I don't know if you haven't seen 1,000 Git tutorials out there, but imagine if you had that pulled into your knowledge base and you could remix and wrap around your tutorials around that base content without having to go, I need to recreate the wheel again. I need to recreate the wheel again. And looking at all that content online that is doing so. I think it's really cool to make content that you can round, as long as, of course, the license allows for it. It depends on that. If it has non-derivative or the other aspects to it. So with that being said, best practices that I learned, and again, I have a lot of notes that will be on the website, which will be easy reference, is canonical URL this should be a best practice with anyone who's creating a Dendron vault that is converted from official content in some way. Because then at least if it gets published, let's say someone publishes a multi-vault, you can publish your own vault that has multiple vaults in it. at least they will always have the canonical URLs in them, pointing to the proper locations. And so that's a big deal. Same with having not only a license reference, but also a license file. This is just general open source best practices. Is you want to have a license file. You also want to be able to, in cases, be able to point to the license file of the original content. And so that's why I include a license point to their Creative Commons one in this virtualization doc. And make use of I'm kind of using the README, by the way, to let's go to the README here, and use the regular Markdown video. Using the README to also talk about the licensing, where the GitLab pages, publish pages, the Microsoft source docs, again, the Dendron visualized CLI generated image. Also a big walkthrough about what even Dendron is and the community and a lot of resources related to it. Because I'm wanting to treat these as sort of every page is page one. For someone who might be looking on the internet and may land at my repository and may have never used Dendron before. So I kind of wanted to create a standard about Dendron section that I'm going to add to each of the vaults, because then if someone gets to the publish site, if someone gets to the main repo, etc., they have a full breakdown of what this is all about and a ton of resource links. And that's kind of those are a few of the things I wanted to make sure to have done, and because I included all the links per note, it makes it as easy as possible for someone to contribute to the upstream documentation that these are pulling content from. Really, the goal would be that the only issues someone would raise in a repository would be, hey, your automation missed, like, automation parsed the markdown in a weird way and messed up this page. Then that's a bug in the automation. And because someone could always look at the published page that Microsoft has to see who is it that broke this. And I already went through the example front matter that I kind of found important. Example license notification, went through that. More on the canonical URL stuff, I talked about that. But the reason, by the way, I didn't make an import pod or use this to expand the markdown import pod that Dendron has is I'm just a lot more familiar with Python. And I started to realize that it'd be cool if right now this repository doesn't have like the Python code I used. I'm wanting to make a package that's going to make it easy for people familiar with Python to have kind of like helper functions in creating and writing Dendron notes and working with Dendron vaults. And a friend of mine is looking into potentially even making a PowerShell module for those who are Windows users or who use PowerShell core on other systems. And what's cool is if we can, I kind of think it's cool to have like SDKs in a way, Dendron SDKs in a way across different languages so that people who want to do stuff like this in their language of choice have maybe a better avenue to start with. So that's kind of the long term what I want to do, so that they're not just, because as I was making the Python code for this, I realized a lot of it's reusable functions for working with the front matter or converting markdown formatted links, internal links to Dendron backlinks and the like. So that's probably a good rundown of all the things. I know I kind of just brain dumped, but I made sure that this vault is available on GitLab, published content, GitLab pages publish point is there, and be able to play with it as a remote vault. Of course, if you're not interested in Windows, you probably won't see much of a purpose just yet, other than to see, oh, okay, this is kind of a cool example of taking source content and converting it. So I'd say I could either A, go straight to Q&A, or I could list some of the GitHub issues that I have that would help this ultimately.
So,
Why don't? Oh,
go on,
for it.
Kev. Well,
I was just gonna. I'm gonna stop. So go ahead.
I was gonna say, Derek, I assume you didn't prepare to demo this, but I was wondering, would it make sense to show any of the automation code, or to just as something to do before Q&A, maybe?
I mean, I could show what I pretty much have is a build. Just have a build script that's wrapped around my Python code, because I ran into something funny. Is that one of the issues that I have opened actually is, let me see if I could find it right here. Or Dendron, is that I want to be able to embed or include code files within notes. And because this is something common with a lot of technical docs, is they may reference like a JSON file or a script and say, embed this in the documentation. And so because Dendron doesn't currently support that at the moment, I had to just do some bash magic to go, oh, if you see this, go and grab the contents of that file and inject it to the documentation. So that's one of the issues I opened. And same with like I have allow for markdown links to use front matter variable substitution in the hyperlinks. That's because I want to be able to reuse, like the canonical URL value. I want to be able to reuse it in a hyperlink. But the way it's set up right now is this front matter type of reference doesn't work out of the box. You have to have like the full markdown link inside of an attribute for it to really be used. And so there are a few things I just ran into that I did have to work around some code that then maybe just just duplicates content that could otherwise be pulled out of the front matter. And the last thing was like supporting admonitions, because a lot of technical docs have like note, here's the thing, or warning, blah blah blah. I just converted them all to like bold text in like a quote block. But ends up looking like really is let's see. I am right now in a virtual environment where I have my Python requirements files inside of a directory, and I would end up just doing pip install. I'd probably update a few things. And I would have it install my requirements file. If this was a Python package, it'd be a different story. It'd be a lot easier, which is what I want to do in the future. And then I can just use this. That's it. That just generated the 750, 60 pages. It just converted them all into the format that you had seen inside of the vault. And that's because it's just, I have files that I wanted to skip, but that's because they're files that don't have front matter. So I have a little check that goes, is this even meant to be a markdown file? Maybe, depending on this repository. I'm ultimately looking at a file that is called, I'll actually open it up in the editor for easier viewing. That there's source is a source file that's a lot like what someone would see in the markdown pods. I have a ton of information in here. And it's like, what's the vault name going to be? Because I need the vault name in order to make the remote vault multi-vault links. And where's the license source from, so that can be populated in my links, license type, and a whole lot of other stuff that I even have a section called body snatchers, which is anytime it sees a particular text, replace it with something. This is the example I meant about admonitions. This is like the format that Microsoft uses for admonitions, and so I just replaced it with just a bolded version of those words. And other times where they markdown Microsoft had specific maybe quirks that I wanted to update. Even have a PR that's open upstream because they've made a lot of mistakes in their docs. So I tried to improve their markdown so that I'm not having to try to work around it. So I mean that's a quick run through. Otherwise, the code is a bit maybe more spaghetti or Python specific, and I don't want to stuff that too much into here.
Well, great.
Other questions or comments?
I was gonna say that this looks great, and the issues you've submitted are definitely on our roadmap and relevant. So I and the team are aware of them, and well, I think just like first of all, like this is amazing. Like I think this is a really nice demonstration of the concept of like seed vaults and this idea of like taking existing documentation, like the power of being able to like import it locally, remix it, and add it into your own docs. I know that it's something that we've talked a lot about. It just hasn't like a lot of it has been like, oh, it would be nice to do this in the future after we get all of this other stuff done. But I think, you know, what you did with the MSFT docs is like, this is like the 80/20. It looks usable. Like we don't currently use the Microsoft virtualization technology, but if we did, I would that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to hear because I pretty much will be using this sort of baseline, I think, across things like the Git documentation and a few other things that I know are very applicable to the Dendron community because of how much Git is used, and things like the VS Code docs. Is I pretty much wanted to create using these docs was a good starting point because there's you know, like I said, over 700 pages. And so I got to run into all the problems I'm probably going to run into in other docs. And I'm excited to share more faults as I whip them up over time.
It's so something you mentioned in some of your preparatory notes for the talk, but that didn't come up, is that this is a lot like that scene in The Matrix where Neo downloads knowledge of kung fu and other martial arts directly into his mind, and in that way, it's a big step towards a childhood dream of mine. So thanks for that.
Well, maybe there needs to be a martial arts vault that you can actually say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is I totally forgot about that quote in there. Is the idea of expanding your knowledge base automatically with something just sounds so cool because I'm used to seeing things like Zendesk or I mean, we've become like Google. We have to become like Google masters. I mean, that's why there's even Google Fu as a reference of someone learning how to find things with Google really well. And the idea of being able to go, wow, well, the stuff I care about and really use like every day is like a Dendron lookup away that I could remix and build around. Even if I'm just remixing and building around internally for myself and others. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty powerful, I think. So
Yeah. So if there are other questions from anyone else in this call, you can feel free to speak them up now, or you can also put them in chat, and we'll see them and pick up on them.
Discord added a new feature for you're in video calls like this, that there actually is a text chat now available associated with this channel, this voice channel. You have to kind of click up on the top right show chat button. I think that's most people's user interface for it. But you can post stuff in there, or even the Tea Time general channel too.
Yeah, they added the chat and emojis. So yeah.
Yeah, I saw a ton of thumbs up there. Yeah. Awesome.
I guess one question while other people are thinking, this is this is a great chart, and I think I guess like what I'm wondering is if you think we keep going forward with this like 5 to 10 years, it's always hard to predict how things will turn out. But in like an ideal world, like how do you imagine this would be used? Would there be like documentation and then like a Dendron version of each documentation? Like how will this end up being? Uh, how do you see this being adopted either for your own workflow or like people?
Like how do I think about it?
Yeah.
I see. Well, another really attractive piece about Dendron has been that its openness toward integration. And so, if you're stuck, let's say you make a Hugo website. A Hugo is a static site generator. Same with Sphinx. Sphinx is a static site generator. Same with Jekyll. Jekyll is a static site generator. All of these are tailored or like the publishing result. They're not tailored for the user experience. And so a problem is that people kind of have to each learn the quirks of their specific setup, and they have to use their editor of choice, and they run into the same problems of the difficulty in lookup, finding information, linking information, what have you. And because everyone has teams of people who maybe are focusing on a particular project in a way that works best for them, in the way that they have designed, and Dendron may not be on their radar, that the ability to go, how can I take what exists, even if it doesn't have a source? So let's say it's a website or something that has a series of APIs. Like you talked about Stack Overflow earlier a little bit. There might even be a website that they just don't have their own published documentation, but you can technically then build something to scrape their site if you wanted to have your own internally hosted versions of their notes. Or depends where someone works, they have Confluence that the company maybe uses, or some other type of documentation tooling. And so you may not, as a result, have the ability to work with it. In an ideal world for me, everything's in Dendron. And that Dendron first, and then people do what they will with that as their source of truth, maybe exporting it with their other tools, because that's how I'm planning to use it over the next years. The fact that it has that integration capability that someone who's working on the Kubernetes docs doesn't use Dendron, or maybe either they're unaware of it or they know of it, they just don't use it. The fact that there is a repository maintained that's syncing with it, I could see. What I think would be cool is if only thing I can see is over time, as more vaults are added, is maintainership of each of the vaults. Like if let's say the Kubernetes one breaks for some reason because something's changed with the way they do the source, then that takes some time to fix up, right? So I suppose ideally I would like to just have vaults of everything I use and touch and work around. The biggest thing for me is this would really change how someone does a workshop, does like trainings, does boot camps, because they'd be able to say, okay, everybody, this is going to be about developing serverless software using AWS. Simply pull down this vault into your current Dendron vault. It will pull down all the documentation that we're going to reference and use. And that's like AWS docs, that's maybe JavaScript, that's whatever. And then we're going to follow the tutorial that we've made that's wrapped around it, and that you can use your own personal notes to extend from there. I just think I wish I would have loved this in college. Like if I had this available to me to pull down a ton of stuff that I was learning and then to grow my notes over time would be really powerful, because then I would leave with my own knowledge base, and while with all these other knowledge bases that I've become aware of through my studies. That's a super ideal version.
Yeah. If you lead with Dendron everything, always a good answer in my.
Yeah.
And I mean I get that there's some potential for as we've talked about before, for Dendron to be this big intercompatibility layer, and then to some extent, whether or not other people are on board, you can still make use of everything that way. I mean, I think that's one of the impressive features of your demonstration, is that the docs that Microsoft made were not made to be consumed in this way, but
Well, see, the idea is that, okay, speaking of what would be good next steps, is that I would likely now just reach out to some Microsoft evangelists and dev advocates, because I think it'd be cool to then have partnerships with people who may, because I think I've even seen some Microsoft employees who are like, ooh, I just found Dendron and I'm loving it and I'm using it. So that seems like, hey, these people would likely be very interested in seeing this, and would likely see the value in that way too. And like you said, Ben, what's really cool is I really like that you'd be able to, you have the power to turn someone else's content into something that's more easily traversable for yourself and potentially for your team if you're just using it internally. So I see a lot of value in that, and potential partnerships for people who are using Dendron already at these companies that have this documentation.
yeah, so there's a lot of potentials for, imagine if documentation was designed with this in mind. There's so much more that could happen. It seems analogous to me to like Docker containers, and like you can standardize a development environment for a workshop or for a course or a team, but being able to do that with like the whole ecology of tools that a team uses, I can imagine
That's a really,
really great.
that's a good point about the container analogy. Also, that's also applies to with like software dependencies, right? With the dependency trees, is I have been to many workshops that were maybe multi-day, or I was sent to a training from work that was like a week long. At the end of it, they gave me a PowerPoint slide deck, and I'm kind of brain dead from that week, and I have no idea. I didn't retain much, and now I have to like dive through maybe some slides, or hopefully my own notes were decent. And the idea of being able to go, oh, by the way, just pull down this entire vault, and this will have all the content in it. Same with if you were presenting, if you were a speaker at something. The fact that Dendron also went with Markdown makes this way easier and a lot more possible. Microsoft is open sourcing their docs as in Markdown format. Amazon, AWS in Markdown format, and Kubernetes Markdown format, because most of them are using static site generators that make use of Markdown as a base layer. And that made it way easier to start with, just because Dendron's already extending Markdown. And so that's been a huge win. And because so many people use Markdown as a standard across GitHub, like for one, you could have an awesome list vault that just pulls in tons of awesome lists, which are really just resource links. Kind of like, if you're unaware, there's also a Dendron. There's a Dendron. There's awesome Dendron. And this is a set of resource links that people find very valuable. It's a single Markdown file. Now, that means you could have like just a collection of these. They're in Markdown already. And there you go. You already have like a pretty cool vault that's extended. And now you can go look at links or a particular resource really easy directly inside your environment. So again, yeah, so Markdown, that made it way easier, and because it's used so widespread.
Yeah, something I noticed is that even down to Mermaid.js, and that being standardized in the Kubernetes docs for diagrams, and Dendron just already supporting that in the preview and publishing functionality.
GitHub too. GitHub now supports that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so if you have Mermaid, if you have that Mermaid reference, that code block in your Markdown file, GitHub will also render that too now. It's pretty cool to see more and more supporting it.
I think for Markdown especially, it's been interesting to see it kind of become like a universal data format in a way. I think the way these things always evolve is you choose the least suitable technology for something, and then standard, like AKA this is why JavaScript is everywhere now. But we have users who like they want. We have a specific customer. They want to move. They are in a regulated industry and they want to adopt this new software for data governance that has like everything be audited, but it's going to take like months and years to install that. So initially they needed like something that works now, and so what they did is import stuff into Dendron with the argument that like, because it's Markdown, like it'll be easy then to programmatically migrate that data into the data, and then in the meantime you get auditing, referenceability, the things. But I think just like this idea of Markdown is like it's more than just like it's nice because it's it's like free flow text. So like you're not really structured. You don't have to like write in YAML or JSON, but at the same time, it is also like it can be easily scraped. Like I think Tarek, like with your project, like this idea of like everything that is in Markdown, even though it's maybe not designed for the purpose of programmatic ingestion, because so many things with Markdown now, we have really great tooling to scrape Markdown, to clean it, to format it, so that it almost becomes like machine readable. And so I think we'll see more of this going forward, and it's definitely something we'll be pushing for. But this idea of like Markdown as an inter-op layer, so that you can take data that is both human readable but also machine manipulatable.
%. Yes. Even with I mean, a lot of people use the tool Pandoc, for example, and Pandoc can maybe do its best to try to convert things like HTML or other formats into Markdown. And I mean, that brings up potential opportunities to go, if you made your own custom web scraper for a site, or if you used Pandoc to pull down the HTML pages you cared about, try to convert them to Markdown and play with it from there. The fact that because it's a plain text file, it's automatically machine readable and it's following a standard. There's enough of a shared standard that there's so much cool stuff you could do, and that makes sense. That's cool to hear about those people interested in Dendron for that reason. I'm sure local first pieces and a variety of other reasons are there too, and I think it's I'm writing fiction too, by the way, and I want to use Dendron as a way to use LaTeX and other tooling to pull down, generate ebooks or print-ready PDFs. And so it means I could try to develop tooling around the front matter maybe that says that in how it's going to generate that documentation. Imagine people who do security auditing or pen testing, and they need to generate a PDF report at the end. Well, if they have a full knowledge base that explains all these vulnerabilities, what they mean and what the remediations are, it can pull them in as note references and auto-generate maybe a PDF report for a client because they found these types of vulnerabilities. There's the reusability layer and the remixing potential is so cool. And a lot of people are aware of a lot of this Creative Commons content online. It's not been remixed. It's sort of sitting there waiting to be remixed. And I think Dendron becomes an avenue to build on that in a really cool and interesting ways.
Since you mentioned Pandoc, like one of the ways I've started talking to people is like imagine like Pandoc, like a universal Pandoc, essentially. This idea is you have your information, but you want it in other places. Like Pandoc is like you have your information, you can translate it into different formats. Like that's one thing, but I think it can go far beyond that into you have your information, like it's not just like turning your document into a PDF, but it's like making your document available Figma, Notion, Docs, Calendar, like wherever you happen to be. Like people all use 20 different tools, and this idea of like we're forced to choose and pick among them, and everything is siloed, and you need to remember to copy to like update something. Like it's insane that like we're doing that, but it's like, and so anyways, this is definitely like something that it's becoming like an immersion property of just like how do we integrate all the because there will always be like lots and lots of different things. So what's like a good interop layer on top of that?
So I think that's a good juncture for this question, which I wanted to pose, which is, suppose someone's listening to this and they're really excited about the possibilities of integration and knowledge interchange and having reusable modular docs, um, and like they've got their favorite doc set that they want to pull into a Dendron node base. How can they help out with the work that you're doing, Derek? And like, are you accepting pull requests on the Docs Garden repository and things like that? Is there um,
Yeah, so what the plan is going to be is I'm also gonna have a Docs Garden like web page, like a I got docsgarden.org as a domain, but this is a domain I'll actually use. I won't just sit on it. And I will have a variety of each repo. I'm going to plan to put a contributing.md file in. And so on my screen, contributing.md is the standard way of saying, hey, I want to contribute to this repository. What's that gonna, and what are the steps for it? Right now, I don't have it in here because my contributing file is meant for my scripts at the moment, including a variety of other things, and I want that to be kind of perfected a bit more. The idea will be that in each repository, the easiest way to contribute is open an issue and say the formatting of this page breaks with your automation. For example, might be something I don't catch. One of the things I troubleshoot is I just use docs. I use Dendron Doctor, find broken links. That helped me a lot in finding all of the different formats that Microsoft was using and to address all of them. And now I get the zero error, but I don't know if that really means it, if I maybe mess something up or if Microsoft has some edge case. So again, we talked about 80-20 kind of setup. So the idea would be open an issue in this repo if something with the automation was breaking the document. The other thing would be go to the upstream repo if something with the content is wrong. And this would be the case for all of these that have the capability, is that if you want to go, something's up with the content, I want to update it myself or raise an issue to update it, I will have a link that will allow people to go to the content that's being converted to do what they need to do. If it's not a GitHub repo, I'll probably put an email in instead, maybe, that's associated with if it's based off a website or an ebook. Sometimes authors will have erratas or whatever they're called that has there's a list of all the things they've since corrected. So there'll be that piece. The code will be open source too. It'll probably be in this org also. So the Python, for people who are into Python and who want to build upon it. And my friend who's doing some PowerShell stuff, if he looks to open source it, which is the plan, I believe, then I'd also put it under Docs Garden here. So those tools would be able to be contributed to. My plan, though, with the Python code is to make it plugin based, so that if you wanted to extend it for a specific use case, you'll have directions on how to create your own plugin, as opposed to, making that one Python package larger and larger for lots of edge cases. Otherwise, when it comes to feedback too on the formatting, if it's like, well, what about if you had this in the front matter instead? Or have you thought about this idea? That's something I'd still have to maybe figure out. You can message me in Discord. I'm Script Automate, or I can't even 0264, and you can message me to say, hey, I was taking a look at this and had some thoughts on it, because I do want to ultimately have something that's sort of like what do they call that, RFCs or
Yeah, RFCs, I think. Yeah, it's the right term.
Yeah. Is so that if there's like, hey, this would be kind of a cool thing, because I'm coming up with the best practices and standards as I go for like what would be a good thing to adhere to with converted docs, starting with this baseline that I've kind of created feels like best practices at the moment, but over time could improve.
Yeah, extending the container analogy a little bit, it's almost like when in the cloud world, people started to get together around standardizing container runtimes and whatnot. Um, all right, so very
Yeah, I
cool.
think one of the things is I will, like I said, and I'm going to definitely want to talk about future of like seed bank and that's done because I know that they had like their own YAML config files maybe, and they probably need to be updated for self-contained vaults versus how they're being treated now. And because that's another, you said what would be a 5 to 10 year vision is it would be cool within Dendron to have a sort of moderated, curated seed bank that maybe meets certain best practices in order to then be available for people to simply hit a key in their Dendron window and pull down that knowledge base of choice.
Yeah, let's have a follow up on that, Derek. There's a lot there. And for people who aren't familiar with the CPAing, it's something that we started on, I think, last year. But this idea of like npm for knowledge, like anything you want to know about, you can just port. Um, we took a pause on that just because there were a lot more like basic features and just like fundamental things with publishing we wanted to get right first before we focused on this. But it is definitely still top of mind. So um, TBD, but let's talk.
Yeah, it sounds like the time to plan some sort of documentation and markdown convention consortium type thing. All right, great. So we're reaching the top of the hour. Um, so I think this would be a fairly natural concluding point for this time with that um, tie into the potential future connections and work. Um, is there anything else before we do that?
um, yeah, I would just say like Derek, if you have any like asks for audience or questions or anything you would like to any parting words you would like to leave, please speak now.
I'd if other people are working on vaults themselves that they've been thinking of, hey, this would be cool to turn into a seed, or I want this to be publicly available. Um, the Dendron Awesome list. We right now have a list of some showcase vaults, but there are things you've looked at, maybe tech docs that you use for work if you're in tech. Or if you want it and you want to be notified when I'm creating new ones, I'm probably going to make a little newsletter or something, or at least use the Dendron Discord. I could probably try to see if I can wrangle them into the announcements if I get some new vaults available so that people can be notified and go, oh, cool, here's a Git vault now that I can bring into my workspace and build around, or here's like the VS Code docs, that what have you. So because I think priority is going to be for me is Dendron stack are pieces of what a Dendron user is going to be working with outside of just directly the Dendron commands, and that'd be probably a cool start. And otherwise, yeah, I'll probably see about notifying in the Discord updates.
All right, folks, you heard it here first. And so with that, until the greenhouse talk in August 2022. So thank you very much, Derek, and thanks everyone for showing up on this call. And I'll see you all next time, perhaps.
All right, thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, thanks.